Okay, so it probably would have made the most sense to be talking about Shang-Chi right about now, considering that's where the hype train is. But unfortunately, we can't get out to the cinemas just yet, so we're going to have to wait for that one. In the meantime, we're going to kick off with Black Widow. So, welcome to my first official review for On Second Thought. While I was putting together all the bits and pieces, trying to plan what comes next, turned out that Black Widow was kind of the best movie to really test out the format with. Quick story time. I was lucky enough to attend the premiere for Black Widow in Melbourne, which was a really cool experience and I guess not as exciting as it sounds, I suppose, because it wasn't a press screening or anything like that. I think I currently have 7 subscribers and 4 of them are my mum. But what actually happened was my little brother entered a competition, won a couple of tickets, and I just managed to weasel my way in as his +1 before any of his friends could. Here's a picture of us. He's gonna hate that, but I love it, so it is what it is. Anyway, super classy event. There was a big line where everybody was standing in to get a photo. We thought it was actually the line to get into the movie, but when we realized it was just for photos at the start, we ended up dipping out, getting a cheeky Nando's, and then coming back later when the theater actually opened. They took us upstairs, they gave us some Black Widow themed cocktails, which were unlimited and pretty good, and then they ushered us into the cinema. They kicked off with the Stan Lee tribute video, which was awesome to experience in theaters, especially in a theater filled with Marvel fans. Every single person was on the same level, and that video honestly never fails to get me just that little bit emotional. There was a quick video Q&A with the director, which was pretty cool. Kind of felt like it belonged at the end of the movie, maybe after the credits rolled, but weirdly enough, for an event filled with Marvel fans, there was way too many people leaving as the credits rolled. So a little bit of information about the movie. It's directed by Kate Shortland. I'm actually unfamiliar with her work outside of, I think, 4 episodes of Smilf, which I watched like a decade ago back in 2019. Guilty pleasure of mine. And of course, starring Scarlett Johansson in the titular role of Black Widow. So the movie takes place in that 5-year blip between Infinity War and Endgame. Hey guys, Future Nathan here, just cutting in to say that it actually doesn't take place between Infinity War and Endgame. Sorry about that. It actually takes place between Civil War and Infinity War. Back to the video. You might also ask yourself, doesn't that mean it's kind of hard to have high stakes and tell a story when you kind of know where everything is going to end anyway? And to that, I'd say that I've seen people do it successfully before. Most recently, the Clone Wars finale came back and told a story about a couple of characters that we've seen their whole story from start to finish. But they still managed to tell a really nail-biting story and something that was really interesting. So I guess the question is, was Marvel actually able to capture that same magic? Not really. I'm a little conflicted with this movie in particular because Marvel films as a whole, I'm a massive fan, and I tend to like the ones that are a little bit more out there and sort of try and break the formula a little bit. Things like Guardians 1 and 2, Infinity War, even Ragnarok to some extent. This particular movie really feels like Marvel had the reins on tight. There's a lot of potential at the start where we're really setting up the pieces to tell a spy thriller, kind of Mission Impossible, James Bond kind of story, but by the third act, it ends up devolving into a CGI mess, I suppose, and that's not necessarily something that you can't enjoy. It's entertaining, don't get me wrong, but it's nothing that we really haven't seen before, and that's really what I wanted from Marvel. I wanted to see something fresh here. I want to see more of that wacky stuff. So there's a part of me that it feels really good about the movie and wants to tell people to go and watch it and check it out because I want to see Marvel trying new things, but I don't want to see them start movies trying new things and then end up kind of devolving back into what it already was. So standouts in the movie are definitely Florence Pugh as Yelena. Every single time she's on screen, you're absolutely seeing her steal the show, and she ends up being like the emotional pin that holds the family dynamic together. She also gets some of the best jokes, but I reckon her backstory probably needed just that little bit more work. You got David Harbour, who plays the Red Guardian, who's probably my second favorite character in the movie. Did feel he was a little bit underused though, so I'll try and talk about that a little bit more in the second thoughts. With the villain, it's okay. It's pretty standard Marvel. It kind of feels like they've taken a few steps back there. I didn't find Taskmaster very interesting, and I know that a lot of people were really not happy with the portrayal of the character. I wasn't really too fussed in terms of comic accuracy, but I didn't really find him that engaging. The movie also suffers from just that little bit of predictability as well. You can really start to see all the bits and pieces lining up pretty early on and really get an idea of where the movie's going to go, and that kind of kills any and all suspense. So with any MCU film, I want to leave the cinema feeling obsessed with the property. I want to feel like I can't wait to watch that again. That wasn't really the case for Black Widow, but it was an entertaining film in its own right. Coming back now a couple of months later, I'm pretty excited to check it out again and look at it a bit more critically and really try to understand what worked and what didn't. In saying all that, I remember leaving the theater and feeling mostly positive about the movie. And I mean, that could have been a number of things. It could have been the Marvel hype train, the alcohol, the Nando's, who even knows? But the main thing that I was thinking leaving the theater was that the movie should have come out a while ago. And I know the pandemic happened and it pushed back the release and all that kind of stuff, but the movie just kind of feels like the movies that Marvel used to make, as opposed to the content they're putting out now, which is getting really, really interesting and developing heaps more than they used to. So anyway, that was my first impressions of Marvel's Black Widow. What did you think when you checked it out for the first time? Let me know in the comments, let's talk about it. But for now, let's jump forward in time a little bit and see what the movie was like on second thought. Okay, on second thought, we've got quite a bit to unpack here. Now we're going to be talking some, not all spoilers here, so if you haven't actually seen Black Widow yet, this is your last chance to click off, go and watch it, and come back after you finished it. You're sticking around? Awesome. Going back and watching Black Widow once more really opened my eyes to a lot of issues that I missed in my first viewing that I really want to cover. I want to start right at the beginning and do a breakdown of the prologue of the film. It goes for about 12 minutes and manages to be the perfect analogy for the film in its entirety. The movie opens with a flashback to Natasha's childhood in Ohio 1995, and straight off the bat, I love the callback to Civil War with the large, bold typography for the year and location, and that trend actually continues through the movie as we go from place to place. It's a really stylish choice that stands out from the usual location titles you see in films these days. The film unintentionally sets up what feels to me to be an uncomfortable family dynamic, and that's on the back of some less than ideal dialogue given to our lead children, as well as some really shoehorned moments between Nat and Yelena that just scream, remember this, it's gonna come into play later. These range from simple verbal cues to props that are hyper-focused on and just feels really inorganic. Speaking of which, when Alexei, played by David Harbour, comes home, he's notably distressed, but it's painful to watch, and not in the, wow, that's amazing acting kind of way. He asks, how was everyone's day? And then he grabs Melina, drags her off to some other room to explain the plot to her, while ignoring Yelena's answer in the other room. And she just sits there responding as if he never left. It's really weird. One of the problems I see here is the complete lack of visual storytelling. This could have been the perfect opportunity to showcase the undercover super spy in his element, destroying the facility and then coming home to a quiet family life, really giving us the impression of, is he good or is he bad? Instead, the moment's completely wasted, we get a little bit more overbloated dialogue, and we're on to the next scene. Now this next little sequence is actually one of my favorites in the film. Think The Last of Us when you're driving the truck with Tommy, Joel and Sarah. We're getting a lot of visuals explaining the state of the world to us, and the score here is just... There's emergency vehicles blocking off the road ahead, and Alexei's eyes are darting off to the rearview mirror every couple of seconds, really giving us the indication that he's anxious or uncomfortable that someone's following him. It's a really nice subtle touch and one of the best and only visual storytelling moments in the film. We get another attempt at character moments with Yelena requesting her song, and that's of course planting some seeds for a father-daughter moment to come later in the film, but the song choice feels odd. I mean, it was a long time ago, and I don't know, maybe 90s kids love 20-year-old ballads that go for 8 minutes and 37 seconds. Who's to say? Moving on, we pull up to an abandoned airport and the family get to work straight away. Clearly, it's something that's been practiced consistently, and they all knew this day was coming eventually. Then, Alexei shows us just how strong he is by yeeting a massive trailer out of the way with just his bare hands. It's not much, but it's one of the first and only moments in the film that makes you go, nice. S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up and Melina and the kids are forced to start driving the airplane without Alexei. We get a few more glimpses of his superhuman and super spy skills, with him chasing down the plane on foot, jumping onto the wing and taking out cars with a rifle. Delicious. They get away, we get a super clean transition to Cuba, and our heroes have made it out of the fire. We're introduced to our sneaky mustache twirler Dreykov, and for whatever reason, Alexei's accent changes from American to Russian mid-sentence. He and Dreykov then proceed to have an entire conversation in broken English when it would have made so much more sense to just have them speak Russian and provide us with subtitles. There's some more cringy, forced dialogue with more exposition. Melina's carted off to have some injuries from that chase scene treated, and the soldiers with Dreykov actually stop Yelena from running over to her dad for help. We then get what is probably the best Black Widow moment in the entire film, with Nat running over to a soldier and taking his gun and threatening to shoot anybody who touches her little sister. The lines are delivered with so much pain, anger, and fear that it really gives the impression that she knows exactly what's coming next. It's a cool moment and a redeeming one for Eva Anderson, who portrays young Nat, as it makes it abundantly clear that she was not the problem early on. Less cool is Alexei telling them everything's gonna be okay. Given what happens over the next couple decades, it seems like a really douchebag move, and I'm having a hard time imagining any father being able to recover from something like that in the real world. I'd really hate to lose the previous scene with young Nat, but I think this could have been the perfect opportunity to build on the father-daughter dynamic and really add some depth to some of the scenes that come later on. What I mean is, Have something where maybe the soldiers grab the girls and that flips a switch in Alexei. He fights off a bunch of soldiers, but he's eventually subdued and overpowered, and then he gets thrown in a cell never to see his family again. That it gives so much more emotional depth to his dialogue about family later, and also provide clearer context as to why he's in prison. Instead, the reasoning we get is more akin to, I was double-crossed by evil gay. We get a look at a pretty cool title sequence, a bit long maybe. It reminded me of the X-Men Origins opening, just less effective, and honestly, I do miss those. I'm not sold on the song choice. It's a cool cover, but it doesn't feel like the right fit. It more just kind of feels like someone was fishing for a TikTok trend. There's not too much more to discuss here. You've got a few more awkward lines and Dreykov is creepy as all hell, but overall, it's a mess. And that's entirely indicative of everything to come next. Yelena is still the best character to come out of the film. You can see her and Natasha really trying to make the sister dynamic work, but from what I read, it seems like some of their best lines were ad-libbed offset by the actresses and then added in by the writers later. They're great little moments, but they feel a little jarring compared to how flat the rest of the film is. In retrospect, I can't think of much more I would have liked to have the Red Guardian do in this film, but I can't shake the feeling that he deserves his own film or Disney Plus series. Somewhere else where David Harbour's acting can really shine through. It'd be a shame to not see him again. I just want him treated with a little bit more care and planning. Melina is the character I'm most disappointed in. We're presented with the plot twist that she could defect based entirely on a conversation that happens off screen after she tells us she didn't care about her fake family. The only clue we get here is a callback to the prologue with a prop that should have been left behind. And what's odd is, even after all that and saying everything was fake and she didn't care, she still seems to have a genuine liking for Alexei. Their dynamic is that of an old flame, but it seems like the writers really needed to pick a lane and stick to it. We could even build on the moment I discussed in the opening with Red Guardian. Think she wakes up, they've got the girls, Alexei's a traitor, and they'll be killed if she doesn't comply. This would really tie the family dynamic together much more effectively than it was in the final release. Now, for our star. She doesn't feel like a star. Even in her own movie, she feels like a side character. Most of the story beats have her as a passive protagonist, reacting to the world around her rather than affecting her in any substantial way. There is an attempt at diving into her troubled past, but there's so many better ways that could have been handled. You have the perfect medium here with the abandoned sister and the need to really redeem herself in the eyes of the girl that she loved, protected, but ultimately failed. For me, every good character needs to have some kind of arc. I want to see them achieve something or even fail at something but be able to grow from that experience. There's so many examples we could talk about even in the same genre. Think Spider-Man 2, Logan, X-Men First Class, and heaps of others. But in this film, Black Widow just doesn't have an arc, and by the end you're mostly left wondering, what was the point of this? What I would have liked to see is them delve into some of the aspects of the character they covered in Age of Ultron, but instead you get a still ruthless Nat, but only slightly tortured by some questionable choices she made in her defection to S.H.I.E.L.D. This results in her becoming basically the same as the villain she's trying to destroy without even realizing it, and that's something they could have developed a lot more, but outside of the last 20 minutes and a throwaway line early on, it's just not focused nearly enough, and it really makes the redemption fall flat. Everything related to Dreykov just feels like a Mad Lib. They try to portray him as a master manipulator, but he comes off as a toddler who's mad that somebody else wants to play with his toys. I still found Taskmaster really uninspired, and it really is a failed attempt at a sympathetic antagonist. The idea of a villain that knows you back to front is really interesting, and the first sequence hits home on that point with some great choreography, and it's super cool to see Widow trying the usual, only to be beaten by her own moves. Where it's a little odd are the moments where Taskmaster could easily kill Nat, but doesn't. And Nat survives a lot, and I mean a lot, of falls and crashes that really take away from her humanity and lean heavily into the idea that there's really no stakes in this film. Taskmaster does show up again, but always out of nowhere and gone just as quickly. I think to really make the character more engaging, we need an arc that flows organically through the story, making that character feel more developed and relevant, rather than a last-minute shoo-in. Think Venom in Spider-Man 3. It's a cool concept, but poor execution. That could start with Nat winning the first fight but not finishing the job. That'd make Taskmaster obsess over the loss and try desperately to improve, and in the next fight, Nat could try the same move only to fall short. And I'm not saying that something like that would fix the character, but anything more than what we got is going to be a win. The cold, calculated killer vibe doesn't work here, and instead you're left with a mindless drone that falls short in any attempt to humanize later on. Overall, Taskmaster feels like a bunch of cool ideas that someone thought would look really cool in the trailer, and if you've seen the trailers, that makes perfect sense. It feels like no one was able to settle on an idea for the story they wanted to tell all the way through production, and so characters are left explaining plot points to each other because that's cheaper to reshoot than to go and film real scenes with visual storytelling. It very much feels like a cacophony of conflicting ideas. It's mind-numbing to have a new character introduced, only to have them belt out a bunch of exposition, and then move straight into the next scene to rinse and repeat. The unspoken rule of screenwriting that you've heard 1,000 times is completely ignored here. Show, don't tell. For a spy thriller, there's not a lot of spying and not a lot of thrills. They try to be meta about the Bond-like villain by having Widow watch James Bond on screen, and then presenting us with a mustache-twirling villain explaining his plans in excruciating detail, only to lose. But again, it doesn't work. There's no special flavour or unique flair in the way the film was directed. It's perfectly adequate, but leaves no real impact. I was looking forward to some intense fight sequences, but outside of a few moments of great camera work dished out in teeny tiny doses, shaky cam and bad editing turn what could be really great choreography into a sloppy, choppy mess. This is most prevalent in a sequence with Melina during the final act that sticks out like a sore thumb. Everything else is fine. Guardian vs Taskmaster was awesome, but every time we cut to the story upstairs, I was just begging to go back to the fight. The set pieces are competent. I really like the jail sequence with the reintroduction to Red Guardian. It's performed perfectly by David Harbour and plants some really interesting ideas that deserve to be explored. The finale suffers from some really poor looking green screen, as well as some of the most average CGI marbles committed to screen since the Black Panther finale. The score never hits the highs it does in the opening scene, but it's functional. The cinematography is fine, but outside of a handful of really good looking shots, it just feels bland. So after all that, we're left with a film that drags to the finish line, telling a story no one really wanted or needed. The promise of espionage and hero on the run is teased early on, but instead those expectations are subverted, and the interesting story is replaced with a bland paint-by-numbers narrative. So on second thought, Black Widow isn't a film that's going to leave you astounded or begging for rewatch, but instead it exists as a tick-the-box exercise that you'll play in the background during your next MCU binge. So, what were your second thoughts on Black Widow, and do you agree with mine? Let me know and let's kick up a conversation. And if there's any other films you'd like to see my thoughts on, please let me know. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe with the bell if you want to be notified of new videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next installment of On Second Thought.